The Institute for Faith and Freedom at Grove City College presents Keeping the Faith with your host, Senior Fellow Joe Wolcott.
Psalm 10. Why do you hide yourself? Why, O Lord, do you stand far away? Why do you hide yourself in times of trouble? In arrogance, the wicked hotly pursue the poor. Let them be caught in the schemes that they have devised. For the wicked boasts of the desires of his soul, and the one greedy for gain curses and renounces the Lord. In the pride of his face, the wicked does not seek him. All his thoughts are, there is no God. His ways prosper at all times. Your judgments are on high out of his sight. As for all his foes, he puffs at them. He says in his heart, I shall not be moved. Throughout all generations I shall not meet adversity. His mouth is filled with cursing and deceit and oppression. Under his tongue are mischief and iniquity. He sits in ambush in the villages. In hiding places he murders the innocent. His eyes stealthily watch for the helpless. He lurks in ambush like a lion in his thicket. He lurks that he may seize the poor. He seizes the poor when he draws him into his net. The helpless are crushed, sink down, and fall by his might. He says in his heart, God has forgotten. He has hidden his face. He will never see it. Arise, O Lord, O God, lift up your hand, forget not the afflicted. Why does the wicked renounce God and say in his heart, you will not call to account? But you do see, for you note mischief and vexation, that you may take it into your hands. To you the helpless commits himself. You have been the helper of the fatherless. Break the arm of the wicked and the evildoer. Call his wickedness to account till you find none. The Lord is king forever and ever. The nations perish from his land. O Lord, you hear the desire of the afflicted. You will strengthen their heart. You will incline your ear to do justice to the fatherless and the oppressed, so that man who is of the earth may strike terror no more. Welcome back to Keeping the Faith. I am your host, Joseph Wolcott, and we've got a really good episode in store for you all today.
Maybe.
Maybe. We'll see. As you all know, this podcast is run through the Institute for Faith and Freedom, and I usually focus more on the faith side of things, but we have a really fun crossover between the two today. In the past, I've expressed some concerns about the current relationship between Christianity and conservatism. Today, I want to evaluate the history of this relationship, from its beginnings to the present day. And I also want to take a quick look at the current situation and consider a way forward for conservative Christians. Here to help me with that is Dr. Paul Kengor. He's a professor of political science here at Grove City College, and he is one of our top minds at the Institute for Faith and Freedom. He's also an author. Some of his top books you may know include 11 Principles of a Reagan Conservative, God and Ronald Reagan, A Spiritual Life, A Pope and a President, Dupes, which I would highly recommend that one, and his most recent book is The Devil and Bella Dodd. Dr. Kengor, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Joe. It is good to be with you.
Yeah, thank you for coming. So I guess let's just get right into it. So. The idea
that was quite an intense kickoff there, man. I don't know. That's, gee, wow.
Yeah.
How do I follow that?
Well, let's just get right into it.
Yeah, sure.
So, yeah, we have. There's a lot we could talk about with this, and only so much time to talk about it. So I want to just kind of hit the ground running. Christianity and conservatism. I mean, one of the things that we stress here, and I've mentioned on the show before, is that, often at our conservative minds lectures, you mentioned that faith is the cornerstone of conservatism. Mm-hmm. We're both pretty obviously card-carrying conservatives here at this college, so I want to kind of just take a look at what it means to be a conservative Christian. Mm-hmm. So let's start with the founding and all that, and like the faith of the founding fathers.
Right. Well, and I would add here to pick up with your introduction. So, and the Institute for Faith and Freedom, we're truly about faith and freedom, right? Mm-hmm. So we believe, as the founders believed and as conservatives believe, that you need both faith and freedom. And Ronald Reagan referred to what he called the twin beacons of faith and freedom that brighten the American sky. And I love that because, I mean, think about that. Not two beacons, but twin beacons, right? The twin beacons of faith and freedom that brighten the American sky. So if you had only one beacon say, freedom, it's going to be darker. It's going to be more difficult to navigate your way around. It's going to be, a bit more murky, right? So you need the rudder of faith to help steer and navigate freedom. And that's something that not just Reagan understood and Russell Kirk and some of the early kind of founders of modern-day conservatism understood, but certainly the American founding fathers. George Washington talked in his inaugural address, his farewell address, about how in terms of self-governance, religion and morality are indispensable supports. So in order to have a truly self-governing nation, and we think of America as a nation of self-governance, you need to self-govern yourself before you can have people capable of self-governing the nation. So I was talking in our class today, right, about My Country 'Tis of Thee. There's a line in My Country 'Tis of Thee: confirm thy soul in self-control, thy liberty and law. It also reminds me of the John Adams quote about how our Constitution was made wholly for a moral and religious people. For a moral religious people, it is wholly inadequate for the governance of any other type. So you need a people that don't just have freedom, but have faith to be the anchor to that freedom, to help guide that freedom, whatever metaphor you want to use. And where we are today, unfortunately, is a modern America. And Reagan said this in one of my favorite speeches. In fact, we put it when I did the book 11 Principles of a Reagan Conservative. The editor, the publisher, Al Regnery, said, it's a short book, which we intended to do a short book. Put 4 speeches at the end. And I said, okay, so which ones? He said, whatever you want. So I picked A Time for Choosing, Reagan's classic October 1964 speech, Evil Empire speech, inaugural address, beautiful speech written by Peggy Noonan. And I picked Reagan's speech to Georgetown in 1988. And Reagan said in that speech that America has always been guided by faith and freedom, and let us pray that it will always be so. Well, we could pray for that, and I do, but I think we're now at a point in America where we're being guided by freedom and freedom. And as faith diminishes, especially as the largest group of Americans self-identifying today, the largest growing group are the nones, N-O-N-E, no religious affiliation. We're at a point where we're facing freedom run amok without the rudder of faith, and that's very dangerous. It's not good for the future of the country.
Yeah,
those are all kind of very conservative sentiments, right? And I'm just cut in anytime you want. But Russell Kirk talked about how.
We'll get to those guys. Yeah. I want to kind of start with the founding, and then we'll shift to the more modern guys. So I want to hit quickly the idea that the founding fathers were all deists, because you see this idea thrown around. I guess in general, the founding gets very abused by people that have their different narratives. And there's a particular anti-Christian narrative that, with classical liberalism and pluralistic principles in deism, that those are not truly Christian principles. So we can't really say that there's any Christian founding to America. So what would you say to that?
Well,
that's
what certain people want to read into the founding. That's what we want to take away from it. In fact, I remember reading a comment from a liberal professor who said, the more secular that I find James Madison, the more I like James Madison, right? So he wanted a secular Madison. But very, very few of them were deists. I mean, maybe 2 or 3. And if I had to name the 2 or 3, I don't even know that I could name them, because I'm not even convinced that the 2 or 3 that they often name were deists. I mean, one of them is Thomas Jefferson. And Jefferson was not a deist. Jefferson had some funky, non-traditional beliefs about Christianity, about Jesus. The so-called Jefferson Bible, which was his compilation of the teachings of Christ, where he excised out the miracles and other different things. But I mean, read even the text of the Declaration of Independence. 1,817 words, written mostly by Jefferson, some edits by Adams and Franklin, the Constitutional Congress, 86 edits by the Constitutional Congress. Jefferson called them mutilations and complained about them for the rest of his life. But that's not a deistic document. And you read a lot of the statements from Jefferson on religion, they're not deistic thoughts. And here I would highly recommend the tremendous work by my colleague Gary Scott Smith, who taught here at Grove City College for a long time and just retired just a few years ago. His office was right next to mine in the suite. And he's done a number of great books on this, but he did an Oxford University Press book called Faith in the Presidency. The chapter on Thomas Jefferson is terrific. And you'll see that, yeah, it's really hard to categorize Jefferson, no question about it. But he wasn't a deist. Most of them were not deists.
Yeah. And I guess before we move on from the founding, because, that's kind of a quick self-explanatory era to hit, I'm curious about the issue of church and state, because this is one, again, people like to abuse it, but you have people more in the Christian nationalist camp of things that really like to claim that, well, there were observably these explicitly Christian principles in the founding, and they'll cite other things as well for why the model should be a Christian state, as the Christian nationalists want it. But then, of course, you have people that want Christians to not really exercise our faith in the state. They'll say, well, separation of church and state. Like, where do we get that idea of separation in church of state? And how would the founders have thought of that, being mostly devout Christians themselves?
Well, the phrase separation of church and state comes from a letter from Jefferson to the Danbury Baptist Association in Connecticut. And at that point, the Danbury Baptists were about as much of a majority as Baptists are in Connecticut to this day. so they were looking for protection from the state as a persecuted religious minority. And the phrase is wall of separation. So that comes from that letter from Jefferson as president. It's not in the Constitution, and Jefferson wasn't even at the Constitutional Convention. Jefferson did the Declaration of Independence about a decade and a half earlier. So there's this complete misunderstanding of what is separation of church and state, whether or not it's in the Constitution. But I mean, look, what the takeaway from the founding ought to be, and the history of America, is that we were a nation founded on sort of basic general Judeo-Christian principles. And the vast majority of the founders were Christians. I mean, every single signer, there were 56 signers altogether. Let me see, for the Declaration of Independence, 86 signers altogether between the Declaration and the Constitution. I think 56 for the Declaration. And all of them were members of Christian denominations. I mean, they were mostly Congregationalists, Anglican, I think like one Baptist, one Quaker, one Catholic, but the vast majority were members of traditional faiths, denominations. They weren't any sort of weird church that no one quite understood. So they were all influenced by that. The Declaration, our founding documents, the Constitution, they were all influenced by both biblical and natural law. So America is a country that was influenced by these Christian principles. So I don't know if you want to. People come up with these terms, Christian nationalism and everything else. A lot of these are terms that are being used by the left to attack people on the right, always have been. They want to put you in some sort of category. I get this all the time, Joe. Somebody will say, oh, well, Paul Kengor, well, he's a, something, not curse words. They'll do that too. He's a blankety, bleep, bleep, right? But he is a something else, neoconservative. I'm like, where are they getting this? I don't even know what that is. What they're calling me, I don't even know what that is.
Yeah, and the terms are so nebulous too.
They are, and a lot of people don't even know what they mean.
Because like the most common I've heard Christian nationalism pop up was like around the midterm elections when people were saying, oh, well, these conservatives want to vote against abortion. They must be Christian nationalists.
Right.
So you're saying Christian nationalism just means voting according to your principles?
Yes, and this is often by people who don't understand religious people, don't understand conservatism, and I would say in many cases don't have any friends who are conservatives and don't have any friends who are devout Christians, at least that they know of. And oftentimes those people you're watching right now, you might be in a group of friends and you'll be there just, popping off about Christian nationalism, whatever. If there's a group of 10 or 12 of you, you could be in Manhattan or wherever. I guarantee you, dude, there are 2 or 3 people in that group who completely disagree with you and they're afraid. They're afraid to talk. I might be looking at the wrong camera. But they're afraid to talk because of how vicious and nasty and intolerant you are. You think you're tolerant, but you're not. And so if you could cut the edge a little bit and try to talk with people and dialogue with them for true diversity, like you really want to do, you might be surprised at what you learn. But I'd never want to be with a group of people where 2 or 3 people in the group who disagree are afraid to admit that they disagree because I'm such an intellectual bully, right? But that's what happens. That's what passes for discourse in a lot of our places today, and especially a lot of our terrible universities.
Well, and having that freedom of dialogue is such an essential part of being conservative.
Yeah,
it's like
that's
the free
right.
market of ideas.
Yeah, and we're not afraid of these ideas. I mean, the way that I am where I am today because I've always read what the other side says. And I mean, at one point when I was in college, when I was your age, I was agnostic, probably an atheist. And to this day, I mean, I read both sides every day, every morning. And it never ceases to amaze me how when I'll get in an argument with a liberal and I'll explain to that person the basic conservative position on something, they will often give me a deer in the headlights look like, I don't know how to respond to that. He's just put me in a corner. And I'm thinking, don't you like read anything on the conservative side? If you did, you'd surely be equipped to respond to that because that's like a basic conservative position. And the answer is no, they don't. They're very one-sided. So I know how to respond to their point of view because I read it every day.
Well, and it's if you think you're
time.
right, you shouldn't be afraid of your worldview coming into clash with another one.
That's right.
If anything, it would sharpen your own.
And that's how you should come to your worldview, by considering all sides and then arriving at what you believe to be the truth. I mean, that's my process, I hope. I mean, we're all biased, but we all come in with presuppositions, but we also come in with in our case, back to the founders. If you come from a basic Judeo-Christian position, you come from a basic understanding, to quote Kirk, an enduring moral order, the first things, the permanent things that are out there. But even then, that's not where I was when I was your age. When I was your age, I thought that Christianity stuff was goofy. So I came to it only by reading, and studying.
Yeah. So let's fast forward to Kirk, to Goldwater, Reagan, all those guys in sort of like the 50s into the 60s and all that. So where do we see the continuity between them and the founders, particularly when it comes to faith? And are there any major differences between how they approached the issue?
Yeah, they thought they were picking up from the founders, no question about it. And really, Kirk said that conservatism is not an ideology, all right? Or maybe a better way to put it is less an ideology than it is an attitude. And Kirk didn't like the idea of ideologues, right? And so it was a mindset, it was a way of thinking, it was a temperament almost. And I get that. That makes sense. Although conservatism has become an ideology, and that's okay, right? It's become an ideology in terms of an idea, the battle of ideas, just like there's progressivism, libertarianism, liberalism. But they believed in that there was biblical law, natural law. I think I just said it again, the enduring moral order, and this was a continuity from the founding. G.K. Chesterton called it that democracy of the dead, the democracy of the dead. So the idea, Kirk quoted that from Chesterton, so did Reagan. Reagan said conservatism is about learning not just from the current generation or the previous generation, but from all the previous generations and the combined experience of mankind, going back thousands of years. Chesterton said it's the idea that your ancestors knew something that you could take from. They're not just a bunch of what did they know 1,500 years ago? What did they know about raising children and getting married? They knew a lot about raising kids. They had a lot more of them than we do today. And they learned about human nature. They learned about biology. They knew gender. They understood marriage and the differences in the sexes and the complementarity of the sexes. So the conservative says all that stuff, that patrimony, that matters. We can learn from it. We don't just reject what our ancestors believe. The progressive says, no, I mean, we evolve, we progress, we move on. What those people thought of marriage, I don't know as much about it as we do today, right? We're better now. It's a new culture. It's a new day. We can redefine marriage. In fact, we can redefine gender. Those conservatives who say that gender is based on biblical law, natural law, male, female, XX chromosome, XY, Jesus pointing to Genesis, right? Genesis, male and female, he created them. A man and a man and a woman will leave their parents and become one flesh. That's a biblical law understanding, right? Then there's a natural law understanding. But the progressive says no. We can reject that, right? We can learn through progress that we can come up with new definitions of gender, to the point where now, and this is the train wreck that all of this is, how many genders are out there right now? Google it. When I first started checking this stuff, it was like 53, and then 56, and then 70, and then there was this BBC documentary for kids, right, for teachers, that said there are over 100. In fact, the LGBTQIA+, the plus is meant to designate that basically ... We don't know how many there are, whichever ones you want to come up with. And the conservative would say, that's a train wreck, right? It's male and female based on biblical natural law. And when you can't mess with something as basic as that.
Yeah. And one thing that's always struck me is just how in sync biblical and natural law are. That, I mean, obviously the philosophers who articulated natural law were building from a Christian frame of reference, but it just also how much, when you dig into it, they each affirm each other, and just even before the philosophers got into it.
Well, yeah, Augustine and Aquinas said, right, that the natural law was given to us, knowable by human reason, but implanted in the heart of man by God. And Aristotle and Cicero, who were Greek and Roman, and both pre-Christ, they even talked about this too. This universal, everlasting, and unchanging law, and you can try to make laws that go against it. Was it Augustine who said it is a sin to try to alter this law? It is so human beings, the laws can try to do that, and they can even succeed in doing it, but they're going against a universal application of law that's everlasting and unchanging. Yeah. And the Christian would say, well, it's because it's been implanted there by God, and God is the creator of the universe. But even a non-Christian, even somebody who, like myself in college, was an evolutionist, could look at this and say, I mean, I was a biophysics major. I took genetics 3 times, actually. because I hated genetics. So not because I had mastered it 3 times, and believe me, but looking at basic reproduction, human reproduction. I mean, that as soon as you start looking into that, you understand how the two come together and make one flesh, right? The purpose of the male sperm is to fertilize the female egg, and when she's fertile, and that leads to reproduction and the child being born, either with XX or XY chromosomes. So there you have a natural law and biblical law to become one flesh, biological unification of that understanding. And then even an evolutionist should see that.
Well, the Apostle Paul affirmed this. You know, Romans 1, the glory of God has been made known to them, so they are without excuse.
At least twice in Romans.
I think it's Romans 2 as well. He says that those who don't see it are self-deceived. Right. So you have that element of things. And I think it's a truly lamentable thing that, especially like in modern Protestant circles, we've really lost a lot of that.
Yeah, that's really frustrating.
Because I know natural law, you're coming from a Catholic perspective.
Right.
And, you've got giants like Aquinas and whatnot in your background. Like, you guys have always held on to that element of it. But especially with Van Til and the reaction against theological liberalism in the 1900s, there was really a shift in Protestantism, and especially Reformed Protestantism, away from that.
But I would blame it on modern evangelicals dropping it, because the American founders all believed in natural law. They were all Protestants. I mean, there was, I think, one Catholic at the Declaration at Independence Hall, Charles Carroll of Carrollton, I think. And,
that sounds right.
Yeah, but they were Michael Novak's book On Two Wings talks about this faith and reason at the American founding, Fides et Ratio. But it was always natural revelation. But this was always understood by Protestants as well as Catholics. And I think the movement toward modern-day evangelical non-denominational churches, right? They've lost a lot of that intellectual tradition. One thing I admire about Calvinists is that they haven't, right? In fact, my closest allies and friends on faculty are my fellow Calvinist professors. I'll talk to Mark Graham and others about this, Carl Truman, but we are kind of more, they and myself as Catholic, we're more creedal Christians, right? We have creeds, we have catechisms, we have statements of faith. And the evangelical non-denominational churches, which I don't want to be too critical of, that's how I came to Christianity. But I think they're often great gateways, entryways into the faith. They were for me. But if they don't have a deep intellectual tradition, they'll have wonderful preaching and all kinds of stuff. But at some point, you need to draw from a deeper well of intellectual theological tradition.
Yeah.
And if you don't, then you will lose something like natural law.
And
You'll lose a whole library.
And
on
being
natural
historically rooted like that's important.
Yes.
I always go to Hebrews 11 and 12 for this. You have this list of the great figures of the faith, and then, what does chapter 12 start with? Therefore, since we're surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, this is why we should endure.
Yeah, I love that.
So it's like Christianity is part of a history. Like there's continuity to it, and to ignore historical theology, to ignore history, is to just really do a disservice to the faith.
And some of the best writings are on the early church fathers. And I mean, after you've read the Bible 10, 20 times, and I still read it every day. I mean, every morning I get up and I read from the lectionary, the Old Testament, the Psalm, the New Testament. So I'm always reading it every day. But reading some of the writings of, take the 1200s and 1300s, Aquinas, Bonaventure, Catherine of Siena, 1347 to 1380 she lived. Even somebody like Dante, right, with Inferno and the Divine Comedy, you can see there an understanding of the 1200s, 1300s, and of course this is all pre-Reformation. These are some great writings, and you can really dig into them and benefit from them.
Yeah.
So to not have that,
or going even earlier than that. I mean, I had the great blessing of being brought up in a classical Christian school. So I read St. Augustine when I was younger. Read Athanasius's On the Incarnation in 8th grade. Like so many great works from the early church.
Yeah. And Clement of Alexandria, Origen, Tertullian,
Irenaeus.
Irenaeus, Ignatius of Antioch,
Justin
his letters
Martyr.
on the way to his martyrship, martyrdom 107, 110 AD, and it's believed that he knew John, the apostle, the beloved disciple. So, and then going up through, there's so many writings, 500, 600, 700s, and of course the major church councils. We're doing this interview today on my birthday, December 6th, which is
happy birthday.
Thank you. Which is the feast day of Saint Nicholas. And Nicholas, of course, Saint Nicholas is Santa Claus. Read about what Nicholas did at the Council of Nicaea. Man, I mean, these guys helped ensure that you have the Trinity. I mean, now people say, well, Jesus, God gave us a Trinity. I know, of course. But these were knockdown dragouts.
Like Athanasius Contra Mundo, there was some serious contention around this. It's kind of like a well-duh thing to us now, but
right.
Like when you read how intense the Arian heresy was back in the day.
Oh, it was unbelievable. There were 2 or 3 church figures that spared us from the Arian heresy. And the word Trinity is not in the Bible. So I mean that. It was early church councils that hammered that out.
I'm pretty sure it was, I could be getting this wrong, so someone can fact check me in the comments, but I'm pretty sure it was either Tertullian or Origen who first used the word.
First used the word
Trinity. Yeah,
I'm not sure. Although it was defined at Nicaea.
Yeah, it was really defined in the Nicene Creed and whatnot.
325,
and then
again 381.
Further clarifications, of course, in the Athanasian Creed and in Chalcedon and whatnot.
And how can you ignore all of that? And go back and read some of those things, even like Council of Trent and some of these earlier church councils. It's really It's profound. It's great stuff. It's always made me more Christian to read it.
I'll have to respectfully disagree on Trent.
Okay.
But
Oh yeah. Well, yes, of course. Right.
But we'll leave our differences in a
that's
peaceful,
okay. Sure.
Respectful agree to disagree there. But let's rein it back in a little bit and talk about especially the emergence of Ronald Reagan and that really giving shape to the modern conservative movement. Can you talk a little bit about how churches got involved in that? Because I know from taking some of the history classes here, you really see a spike in church involvement around the Carter years, really came to a peak in the Reagan years. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, Carter really helps inspire the whole born-again movement. In fact, the two figures that were most associated with that were probably Jimmy Carter and Chuck Colson, of all people, from the Watergate years, the Nixon years. And there developed a kind of Bible Belt, and then Moral Majority. Jerry Falwell and that group came along to support Reagan in the 1980s. And a big part of that, I'd say more than anything else, Joe, was the cultural liberalism of the Democratic Party and the liberal left. And as they started, as the two parties became really polarized on abortion, I mean, at one point in the early 70s, it's probably an equal split between Democrats and Republicans on who was pro-choice. I mean, Ted Kennedy was pro-life at one point, right? And now you can count on one hand the number of pro-lifers in the Democratic Party in the Senate and the House. In fact, I don't know that you even need one hand. I don't know if there are even five.
No one comes to mind.
In the Senate currently, Joe Manchin is somewhere in the middle.
I think didn't Sinema go? Wasn't she in that crowd?
Yeah, I mean she's pro-choice.
Okay, I'm probably thinking of someone else.
Yeah,
then.
Bob Casey Jr. is a absolute betrayal to his Democratic father's great name on the pro-life cause.
Planned Parenthood v. Casey.
The Casey today is not pro-life, period. He's not. Just look at his voting record. Look how he's ranked by NARAL and the Susan B. Anthony. He's not pro-life. So there aren't very many. But so a lot of conservative Democrats and traditional Democrats, religious Democrats who were pro-life on abortion and some of these issues felt that they had to support Ronald Reagan. I mean, they were more in Reagan's camp than they would be post-Carter, Mondale, Dukakis, and all the others.
Yeah. So would you say then abortion was kind of the issue that started to turn it into more—
It was a big one.
Christianity into more of like a partisan thing, in the sense that like beforehand you could really see Christians on either side of the fence there.
You really
but then,
could.
like, once you get stuff like abortion, which is very clearly anti-Christian principles, you see more of that shifted. Well, I can't go with the people that are murdering the babies.
Right, yeah. And a lot of people were like that. And I remember telling Democrat friends over the decades, I said, why don't you guys just nominate somebody who's not fanatical on the abortion issue? Somebody who's at least like 50-50 on the abortion issue. But they became so devoted to the pro-choice position that they refused. They wouldn't allow it. And what happened on abortion has now happened on marriage and the gender issues as well. So today, if you have a traditional view on abortion, unborn life, marriage, sexuality, and gender, you kind of have no choice but to vote Republican. I mean, because the whole Democratic Party is just completely just to the far left on all of those issues.
Yeah, and we see that there is this strong Christian root that continues in the right. But I kind of want to pull things now to modernity, because I see a few problems in modern conservatism, particularly with the rise of what I've heard some call the post-Christian right. You have people like the red pill community, so like your Andrew Tate people and company. You see some principles that come to the fore in some of the Trump years. So like there was this, what I see in Trump and a lot of the sort of loud voices that followed him were people acting in very un-Christian ways and people in the conservative base supporting that. So I guess, I don't know, I want to unpack a little bit. Like, has there been a change, or like what's changed to get us to this point that we're seeing this turn in the modern day?
Yeah, I think a lot of the people on the Christian right who supported Trump just finally got so fed up that it was kind of this is a crass way to put it. I hate using it, but almost Trump was almost like their middle finger, right? I don't like using that imagery, but their way of telling everybody, just stick it. We've had enough, right? Trump was their guy to smack the other side. And I told people in 2015, 2016, pro-lifers, I said, if you think Donald Trump's pro-life, you're out of your mind. I mean, this is a guy who was a billionaire, playboy, pro-choice his entire life. But having said that,
those court nominations,
on the abortion issue, he was the best pro-life president we ever had. And I've talked to some faculty members about this who don't like him at all, and they think that Trump still doesn't really mean it, that he was just doing it for political reasons. But I don't know. I mean, I follow this stuff very, very carefully. I mean, go to lifenews.com and look at the list that they put together of like pro-life actions by the Trump. This is like 100 pages. I mean, you just go down, 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 down. You don't do all of that and fake it. I mean, by the end of his 4 years, I was convinced that he had become pro-life. And by the way, my guy, Reagan was pro-life, but Reagan's pro-life record could not compare to Trump's. I mean, Trump's pro-life record was extraordinary. And when it came to court appointments, Trump smoked Reagan. I mean, Reagan appointed Sandra Day O'Connor, Anthony Kennedy. Kennedy was a disaster, especially on Planned Parenthood v. Casey and the Mystery Clause.
But at least he had Scalia.
Yeah, but he did get Scalia. So 1 out of 3, Scalia was great. But Trump gave you 3 Supreme Court appointees, including ones that were hard to get through, which got literally maybe not a single vote from any Democrat in the Senate.
I think, it was pretty party line for both Barrett and Kavanaugh.
Yeah, and Neil Gorsuch, too.
Gorsuch, too? Okay.
And Gorsuch was really he's like right out of Central Casting. He's like perfect for the Supreme Court. But Trump pushed all of them through, and they overturned Roe v. Wade with Alito. By the way, Alito is a hero. Trump ended up being great on the pro-life issue. This is undeniable. Now, for some anti-Trump conservatives who still don't like Trump, fine, cool. Cool, great. For whatever the other reasons are, great. But don't deny that on the abortion issue, he did. He was great.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, whatever motivation.
For whatever reason, yeah. I mean, that's completely fair. I guess my overall concern with him is that, so at least when it comes to Christianity and whatnot, he has somewhat of a weird record with that.
Oh yeah, very strange.
He's endorsed Paula White, who's a famous prosperity preacher, as his favorite pastor. He said some really weird things about the idea of sin and prayer and whatnot that kind of raised an eyebrow for me.
Yeah, no, he's definitely not. I don't know if he even goes to church. I was asked right away into his presidency to write the book God and Donald Trump, and it was by a major publisher. And they offered me a lot of money to write it. And the editor who offered it to me, the publisher, said that his favorite book was God and Ronald Reagan. And he knew about God and George W. Bush, which I wrote, and God and Hillary Clinton. He wanted me to write God and Donald Trump. And I said, I don't want to do it. I don't want to write it. I don't. And then he started telling me things about Trump's faith upbringing and a few other issues, including abortion, that were fascinating. And I thought, well, I don't know, this might be a fun book to do. And I would do it right down the middle as a reporter explaining. And I said, but I would have to interview Trump. I would have to interview the family. Right now I'm working on like 3 different books. I don't really know if I have time to do this. And he said, well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to see him next Sunday. And it was actually for Easter Sunday. And I'm not telling you the names of these people or anything. This is the first time I've said this on air, and this will probably get out there now. But he said I'll ask him what he thinks about it. So I waited about 2 weeks. I can't remember if he called me or I called him. I was in no hurry to do this book. I didn't want to do it. And I said, well, how'd the conversation go? And he said, well, Trump knows who you are, and he knew that at that point I was highly critical. I'd written so many articles for American Spectator and other places against him. And I said, well, what do you think about the idea of God and Donald Trump? He said he just kind of grimaced and groaned, like, kind of snarled. And I said, well, good. That's a sign that I don't have to do it. So about a year or two later, Lee Wishing emailed me and said, hey, somebody took your brand. Look. And it was a book called God and Donald Trump that someone else did. I said, well, first of all, it's not my brand. I don't own that. There's no copyright on titles. And God bless the guy who did this. Good. I'm glad somebody else did it. And I think it was probably a fairly hagiographic presentation. I didn't read the book, though, so I shouldn't say that. But that was my impression from the cover and a few other things. It's probably not unrealistic assumption, but I thought, good. Now that's a book that I don't have to write. But it probably would have been fun. I also got asked to write at one point God and Mitt Romney. I was asked to write that. I shouldn't say the publisher, but they asked me to write it. And it would have been a crash project in about a year for him in 2012. And I said, no, I don't want to do that either. And I don't know enough about Mormonism, and I just can't jump into that, right?
Yeah.
And I got asked to do a couple other God and books that I refused. And I must spend the rest of my life writing God and books. So instead, the sequel became The Devil and Karl Marx. Now, how's that?
A nice shift in the brand.
Right, exactly.
And you've kept on brand with that, with The Devil and
and I don't want to do
Belladad.
any more of those either. With Bella Dodd, it fit because she described her breakaway from communism as a fight against the devil himself.
Okay.
And she said that Lucifer was the head of the international communist conspiracy. She's a fascinating woman. She's like a female Whittaker Chambers. Brilliant, very, very intelligent. So in that sense, The Devil and Bella Dodd worked, but no, I don't plan to do any more Devil and books either.
Yeah. So this is just to wrap up our time together. I guess what would be your advice to conservatives who are listening to this broadcast who really want to make sure that conservatism stays true to its Christian roots? What would be your advice to them
go
on
to
that?
faithandfreedom.com and follow all of our podcasts and the work by you and Grace Riley and Libby Krieger in the past and others. Look at watch some of our videos, the Conservative Mind series, for example. I'll give you a plug for just one of my books. It's called The Principles of a Reagan Conservative. And that's a short book. You could read that, buy it. I don't make any money from it, but that's a concise kind of book on conservatism. Also, there's a good book that Regnery put out, a reissue of a Russell Kirk book called The Concise Guide to Conservatism, with an intro by Wilfred McClay, who's a great scholar, a good friend of Professor Harp here at the college. And I do a full course on conservatism here at the college. I'll be doing that next semester, spring semester. So read, and also go to conservative websites. You can't understand conservatism by reading liberal sources, all right? Just like you can't understand Catholicism by reading anti-Catholic sources or Protestantism by reading just Catholic sources. Yeah, you have to read the side that professes the beliefs to know where they're coming from. So I would strongly recommend The American Spectator. I'm the editor of The American Spectator, founded in 1967. That's spectator.org. National Review, nationalreview.com, I strongly recommend. And there's a few other sites and sources out there, but those two are pretty reliable.
I would also recommend checking out Checkpoint, which is our news site with the Institute for Faith and Freedom.
Sure.
So we've got some really great writers doing stuff over there as well.
But you're going to have to self-educate because you're not going to get a good understanding of it in the politics course at your typical secular liberal university.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being on the show, Dr. Kengor.
Yeah,
I'm
you
going
got it,
to
Joe.
just finish our episode reading our segment from the Heidelberg Catechism. Lord's Day 10. Question 27. What do you understand by the providence of God? Answer. God's providence is his almighty and ever-present power, whereby, as with his hand, he still upholds heaven and earth and all creatures, and so governs them that leaf and blade, rain and drought, fruitful and barren years, food and drink, health and sickness, riches and poverty, indeed, all things come to us not by chance, but by his fatherly hand. Question 28. What does it benefit us to know that God has created all things and still upholds them by his providence? Answer. We can be patient in adversity, thankful in prosperity, and with a view to the future, we can have a firm confidence in our faithful God and Father that no creature shall separate us from his love. For all creatures are so completely in his hand that without his will they cannot so much as move. Amen. Dr. Kengor, thank you for coming on the show.
You got it, Joe. Anytime.
This has been Keeping the Faith. I am your host, Joseph Wolcott, and I hope to see you in the next episode.